Välkommen alla sammen. Today we are looking at a very important subject for the Norse religion. It has to do with death, funeral, burials, and afterlife. And it really is a key ritual in our religion and one of the most important things that we need to focus on, and most people don't even know about it. And it's this aspect of, we call it haugbrot in Norwegian, but there's really not a good English translation for it. It's basically like the act of breaking into the burial mound and either removing, replacing, or shifting around some of the remains or items buried in there that archaeologists have found tons of examples of from the Viking Age and before. Definitely something that was done in many primitive cultures around the world, but there's nowhere that we have as much evidence of this happening as we do in Scandinavia. So this video we are looking into some of the reasons as why this was done, and looking at a great academic article by an expert in the subject. So there is actually a person that did a whole master's thesis focusing entirely on this subject by Rune Soma right here. It's only in Norwegian, but if you can read that, if Swedish or Danish and Norwegian, I'm pretty sure you can find that online for free, but I'm going to walk you through what they found here. Translated, this title means haugbrot, basically like that burial mound breaking and entering, or burial mound crimes, and ruling power, herskemakt, and like grave robbery as a ritual. So the paper discovered a few things as to why this burial mound break-in was done, and I'm going to say haugbrot from now on just to make it easier, but you all know what I mean. It's this act of breaking into the burial mound. So first thing that this paper found is that it was not just simple grave robbery. We have seen in other parts of the world that criminals break into the gravesite and steal items in there, and this is basically what was thought about these burial mounds for 1,000 years. However, archaeologists just in the past 100 years have proven this to be not true. We know this because basically where we find the digs to be made into the burial mound, it goes right to the door on the first try. Right to the chamber door, so they knew exactly where to dig, whoever was digging into these things. Also, in a lot of these graves, archaeologists found that there were some items taken and some valuable items that were just left there. Sometimes it appears that there was nothing taken at all. Sometimes items were just moved around to a different place in the burial chamber. So this is not grave robbery, it's something else. The second thing that the paper found is that it was something that everyone was probably a part of in the village, breaking into this mound. You know, it wasn't just something that a couple people did by themselves. Digging into these mounds would have required a lot of tools, a whole shitload of dirt and rocks and clay to be removed, and it would have taken a long time, and it would have been very loud. Now, if someone in the village nearby saw you trying to dig into their ancestor's grave, you would be in some serious deep shit. So most of these burial mounds are very near a village, in earshot, and can even be seen from what the villages would have been in the Viking Age. So this wasn't a burial mound hidden somewhere miles into the forest or anything like that. So this means that whoever was breaking into this burial mound, they had consent and approval of the village or chieftain. So this was somewhat of a community ritual, we can say, something that everyone knew of, or maybe even everyone was a part of. The third thing that was curious that have been found here is the missing bones. In most of these graves, bones were missing. We don't know why, of course. It's normal for bones to decompose over more than 1,000 years, you know, but in these graves we find the full body of bones preserved, but maybe the thigh bone is missing, or the skull is missing, or one of the ribs is missing, something like that. So it's kind of weird that that happens. It could mean that removing bones was also probably part of this grave robbery ritual, or maybe even certain parts of the body were wrapped or mummified, or maybe the person's whole body was not buried in there in the first place. Maybe they got beheaded while living and were buried months later. It would take quite some time to build these mounds, but yeah, a few possibilities. We don't really know for sure. It's just some interesting information that that these bones being removed definitely plays some part in this ritual. Number four that the paper found was they examined the Christianization. A theory that started a few decades ago was something called translatio, and it's the act of taking a person who was buried in a pagan way and digging them up and having them reburied in a churchyard, the Christian way. So that is one possibility that they found. We do know that they did this. The King Harald Bluetooth actually did this. Another possibility is that, having to do with Christianization, is that Scandinavians did this in an attempt to Christianize by using these burial items found in the mound as relics. And this was done in other parts of Christian Europe. We see the bodies and possessions of saints. They were kept in churches as sacred objects, and you would, take out the bones in order to swear oaths or crown a new king or something like that. You have probably seen an example of this in some movies or TV shows. If you ask me, neither of these are a real good explanation as to why this was done in Scandinavia, because archaeologists have dated some of these grave mound burials and then the break-in that happened shortly after to long before the Viking Age, the 500s, some of them. So Christianity was nowhere near Scandinavia at this time. And we also find similar evidence of this happening in other parts of Europe, such as the Celtic grave sites called dolmens, and some of these date back 7,000 years. That's 5,000 years before Jesus was even born, so no, I don't think Christianity had any part to do in this ritual. And there's even some pretty good evidence that this exact same ritual was done at these dolmens and other burial places in Europe. It's just that in Scandinavia we have more clear evidence of it, but we do think that it was done all over Europe. So it could be an Indo-European thing, not just a Scandinavian thing, but an Indo-European thing going back to times when we were all one people, 5, 6, 7,000 years ago, or even more maybe. It could be a very, very old ritual. Then we have the literature in the sagas about this. Here is a list of the sagas and poems that have a mention of Haugbylt, breaking into the burial mound for these specific objects. Now, the reasons this was done in all these stories is slightly different. It could be reasons going from gaining power, being initiated into a family by marriage, taking up a weapon to use in single combat and then, putting it back in, gaining honor, removing the body. In one story, they remove a body of someone's spirit who was haunting the area and moved it to a different place, and also being reincarnated as the person whose items you took from the burial mound. So all of these were reasons that this was done. Each saga is a bit different. I will go into every story in detail in another video because it's going to take a bit too long, but it is super important. It's a really important ritual that I think we need to uncover the reasons for. But here quickly is just some of the things that all of these mentions in the sagas have in common. It's not a whole lot, but some things. The first thing that they have in common is the sword and the ring were always taken. Sometimes a belt or jewelry or something like that. It was also usually a family member or someone about to become a family member, maybe through marriage or fostering or something like that, that broke into the burial mound. If you were not a family or trusted friend, there was pretty much always a fight. The dead spirit was going to be woken up and fight the person who was breaking in. Always there was also a king or chieftain involved. That doesn't necessarily mean only high-ranking nobles practiced breaking into mounds like this. Regular people probably did it too in Viking times. It's just that, of course, most of the stories we have are written about kings, so that's what we're going to hear about. And also, they had more resources to build these burial mounds in the first place and break back into them when they wanted to. But it's something that, for sure, regular people could have done as well. And final thing that they all have in common is that it was always for some sort of ritual or spiritual, religious reasons. Even if it was a Christian breaking in. This wasn't just viewed as a corpse in the burial mound with a couple items that you could just keep and take like you wanted to casually. No, the person and the items in there were always attached with some sort of spirit or energy that comes with it, and very much alive. So absolutely a pagan animist-centered type of thing. So based on this, June comes with a conclusion, not really a conclusion. He admits that there more research needs to be done to figure out a lot more, but the idea he has is basically one of the reasons for this ritual was an initiation and transfer of power from one generation to the next. So all of this is true, of course. Haugbrot was an initiation ritual of some type and transfer of power, but I think there's a much deeper spiritual reason for this ritual, and we may never know. The truth is that it was probably done for a variety of different reasons, like we have seen in the Saga literature. However, I will finish the video with one more source that you can go read if you want to. It gives just a theory, and that is books by Viking. Some people love him, some people hate him. I don't really care about anyone's reputation or their political views. If I'm looking for good ideas about how to explain things in our religion, I don't care who it's from. If it's a good idea, it's a good idea. But to summarize the theory, he basically thinks that the core of this breaking into the grave mound was done as a reincarnation ritual. But by breaking into this grave mound, then your ancestors' grave, and seeing some of these items, it helps you remember who you were in past lives, and you would get power and a part of your soul and your hamingja back in this life. Kind of like waking up from an amnesia type of thing, like. Also that certain bones were believed to have some sort of life and spirit in them, and that's why bones were removed from a lot of these mounds. It fills in a lot of the blanks in the archaeological evidence, and most of the sagas, kind of agree with this theory too. A couple of them don't. I don't know if I believe in it 100%, but I do believe this to be true either way, even if it's a little bit wrong, because a lot of our myths and sagas allude to this exact thing. Initiation rituals in order to figure out who you were in past lives. There's quite a few of our myths that describe this exact thing. And also, some of the modern science that has been discovered about this. There have been studies on these children who have vague memories of who they were in past lives, and they kind of treat them like amnesia cases, like all of us have experienced that, when we're just struggling to remember something and we can't figure it out and we just can't put our finger on it, and then we see one little thing that fills in the blank, and then we remember the whole story, the whole thing. There are thousands of people studied like this, these children, thinking that they are reborn. Read any books by Ian Stevenson, and I think you'll be a believer. So I think this is absolutely the most important ritual we have in our religion. Exactly how it was done and why, we don't know, but it all comes back to this act of discovering who we were in past lives. But it does seem like it has to be done when we are young and still have fresh memories of previous lives. It's going to be very hard to figure this out as adults who have had our minds poisoned with a lifetime of misinformation. The Christians, 1,000 years ago, they did not want us to continue doing these types of rituals. That's probably why they make us bury our dead in these holy, sacred places, and it's an abomination to dig them up, because by doing that, it's the number one easiest way to figure out who you were in past lives. If you see these items, these treasured items that you were buried with, you see it like, I've seen this before in a past life. I start to remember. Maybe even you take a bone, maybe even you take their bones, and you feel them like, oh, I've had these bones before, so it really does make a lot of sense, but I know it's very unclear, but I'm going to do a lot more videos on this because I really believe it's the most important ritual that we have. And there are other ways too, of course, to figure out who you were in past lives, and that's the reason why I do the things that I do. One day I hope to have a homestead and village where we can have truly actual religious freedom, and I hope I can inspire other people to do the same. And you guys, I want to hear what ideas you have. What do you think? Why do you think this Haugbrot ritual was done? Sometimes a random person in the comments section comes up with the best ideas that I've heard. So let me know if you guys have any thoughts about why this grave mound break-in was practiced. I would love to hear any theories, and of course, always interested in parallels of this practice from other cultures around the world too. I know other cultures have done similar things, but I'm not too knowledgeable about it. But if anyone is, feel free to let us all know. But that's it for today. Vi ses nästa gång.